Hey everybody, this is GGB Colas Puppers, and I hope you're excited for all the different playoff possibilities heading into these final conference championships. I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. So let's dive straight into this thing. So the first playoff prediction is probably the most likely one I'm going to do is not... So, in this playoff prediction, in this playoff situation, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State win their conference championships, right? You know, with Alabama as the 1 seed, Notre Dame is the 2 seed, Ohio State is the 3 seed, and then Texas A&M would come in as that 4 seed because that's just where the playoff rankings has them right now. Personally, I think Indiana is a better football team, or Cincinnati's a better football team as well, but that's where Texas A&M is right now in the playoff rankings, so therefore Texas A&M would be in that spot come playoff time. So then we'd end up with a nice rematch. Oh, actually, we would get Ohio State Notre Dame, which would be very interesting. Ohio State has very good offense, and Notre Dame has a very good defense. So also would be a very interesting thing come playoff time. Then Alabama, Texas A&M would basically, it would be certain that SEC team would make the championship game, which would be unfortunate for all you non-sucky Eastern Conference fans out there, but that's the situation we are in right now. But this would be the playoff situation if that happens. So, second playoff situation I'll go through is probably the second most likely one is if Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State win their... I think Notre Dame's probably going to win this game, but Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State win their championship games, right? So in that scenario, we end up with Alabama as that 1 seed, Ohio State as the 2 seed, Clemson as the 3 seed, and Notre Dame would sneak in as the 4 seed. There's only like one situation, I think. Yeah. 1 or 2 situations where Notre Dame doesn't make it at all, right? So Notre Dame and Alabama are pretty much locks heading into this weekend, even if they lose their conference championship games. Okay. So in this one, we'd end up seeing Alabama against Notre Dame, which is what a lot of people predict the end of the championship game is going to be. So seeing that in the semifinals would be very interesting to see Alabama going against Notre Dame. A very good squad this year. My favorite one would be the Ohio State-Clemson game because that would be a rematch from last year where Clemson won in controversial fashion where they overruled a ruling of fumble that looked like it would be more likely it would be overturned if it wasn't called a fumble than if it was called a fumble. They should have at least let it stand. And it was close. It looked like it was closer to being confirmed than overturned, and somehow it was overturned. I don't know how the heck that happened. I guess Debo Sweeney paid off some refs. But that was a very good game last year, Ohio State-Clemson, with Justin Fields against Trevor Lawrence again. Very interesting. Then this one. This one's a very interesting one, too. So, let's say Florida, Notre Dame, and Ohio State win their conference championship games, right? We all agreed that it's pretty much certain that Florida doesn't make the playoffs since they were knocked out of really playoff contention when they lost to LSU this weekend. If not, then they would have went into Alabama with a chance to beat them and punch their ticket to the playoffs. Unfortunately, even if they do win, there's so many teams in front of them, there's no possible way they get in. That's why all scenarios in which Florida made it were deleted from my playoff prediction videos. But in this one, you'd end up with Notre Dame getting the 1 seed since they beat Clemson in the ACC championship game. And they're ranked number 2, so if Alabama lost, they would slide in as the 1. So everyone moves off the spot, really. Ohio State moves to 2. Alabama sinks to 3, so they go from 1 to 3, not a huge difference, but the only reason that is because Texas A&M would slip in at 4, right, and Alabama really is the tiebreaker over Texas A&M, so if you're just looking at it from that standpoint, obviously Alabama would be a higher-ranked team than Texas A&M, so you end up with the first semifinals, you end up with Notre Dame versus Texas A&M, a very interesting matchup. I think both have very good things to offer on defense. Ian Book is one of my top-rated quarterbacks. That probably won't go in the first round, so is Kellen Mond. So that'll be a very interesting matchup. Both seniors that want to lead their team to a championship. And then you end up with Ohio State against Alabama, 2 powerhouse colleges, and that'll be a very interesting matchup to see. Anyone that has Northwestern winning, which is this next one, is one of my favorites to watch. So in this scenario, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Northwestern win the championship game. So in this one, obviously you get Alabama as the 1 seed, Notre Dame as the 2 seed. That doesn't change. The 3 seed would then become Northwestern, correct? So you're looking at Northwestern. They're in the best spot. Unfortunately for Indiana and Texas A&M, they don't have a chance to go and say that they're conference championship. They are conference champions, right? Northwestern has that shot, so if they win, they're really in my opinion. So if they're in the win, they're in thing. Northwestern would make the playoffs as a 3 seed, right? So they'd be playing Northwestern in the first round. Number 4 seed would probably be Ohio State, because I just don't see the argument for a Texas A&M squad to make it over Ohio State, who's looked way better than Texas A&M has all year. So I think Ohio State would slip in even if they lose their conference championship game. So in that scenario, we'd end up with Alabama, Ohio State in the semifinals, and you'd end up with Notre Dame, Northwestern, which would be very fun because both Notre Dame and Northwestern are known for their defense. And then on the other side, Ohio State, Alabama, Mac Jones, and Justin Fields are both considered first-round quarterbacks, so that'll be fun to watch too. So, the next scenario, we have Florida and Clemson and Ohio State win their championship game. So in that one, obviously Florida can't make it at this point, so it would really just knock Alabama down by a peg. So Ohio State would actually move to the 1 seed. This is one of the few scenarios that would be possible, where Ohio State gets into that 1 position right there. So the 2 seed would become then Clemson, because they are... I just feel like Ohio State would get the nod over Clemson. I think this is the one scenario that would happen. Ohio State gets in, especially if they look impressive against Northwestern. I guess if Clemson wins in a last-second field goal against Notre Dame, I feel like if Ohio State looks impressive against Northwestern, they get in, right? The 3 seed would then become Notre Dame, even though they did lose their conference championship game. There's really no chance of them being left out, just like the 4 seed would be Alabama. Again, same thing. No chance they get left out. Now, Notre Dame would probably get the nod at 3, because a Clemson loss would be a more respectable loss than a loss to lost Florida, right? So that's why, in my opinion, I think Notre Dame would get the nod at 3 over Alabama at 4, right? So if you're, we'll go down the list, because there are still teams in playoff contention that you probably wouldn't expect to be in playoff contention this late in the year, but they are. So this is just the scenarios where different teams win their championships. And so we'll get into the more complex ones as that goes along, right? So the second one is Florida, Notre Dame, and Northwestern win their championship game. So in this one, Notre Dame becomes the 1 seed, right? Northwestern becomes the 2 because they did win their conference championship game. Alabama would become the 3 seed, even though they lost to a 2-loss Florida team, which would be a less acceptable loss than a loss to Northwestern. They have, again, more games on their schedule. So if this was a normal season, I would put Ohio State at 3 and Alabama at 4. But unfortunately, it's not a normal season, so Alabama would get the nod at the 3 seed. Ohio State would get the nod at the 4, right? So in that scenario, we'd end up with Notre Dame, Ohio State, which would be a fun matchup again, and you know, with Northwestern, Alabama, which would be really fun watching that really good Northwestern defense go against that really good Alabama defense. So in this scenario, Alabama, Clemson, and Northwestern win their playoff game. So in this scenario, obviously, you end up with Alabama as the 1 seed, correct? So you're looking at that. Alabama is the 1 seed. You end up with Clemson as the 2 seed because, again, they did win their conference championship game. You end up with Northwestern at the 3 and Notre Dame at the 4, which means we get to see Northwestern's defense against Clemson's offense, against Trevor Lawrence, the future first overall pick. And then you're going to get to see Alabama and that vaunted offense go against Notre Dame, and that vaunted defense is going to be a lot of fun if that turns out to be the playoff scenario. So in this playoff scenario, Florida, Clemson, and Northwestern win, right? So all upsets across the board in the SEC. Well, not really. I don't think it's an upset in the ACC because I actually think Clemson's favored in that game. But in Florida, Clemson, and Northwestern, they all sweep. So, you know, with Clemson as the number 1 seed, correct? So then you get Northwestern as the 2, which is, I think, the highest Northwestern can go. I mean, it's possible they've gotten it. They get in different scenarios a few other times, right? So, you know, with Clemson as the 1 seed, Northwestern as the 2 seed, Notre Dame has a more quality loss over Clemson, right? I already explained this to you guys before. If Clemson beats Notre Dame and Alabama, Florida beats Alabama, Notre Dame gets the nod mainly because they have a more quality quality loss to a Clemson team that's probably going to be, in this scenario, the number 1 team, right? Than Alabama does to a 2-loss Florida team, correct? So Notre Dame would get that nod at the 3 spot, considering they do have a win over them in the regular season as well. And then Alabama would slip in as the 4 spot. Again, there's no situation in which Alabama does not make it. They really assured that when they beat Arkansas this weekend, right? So this would be a scenario, of course, if Florida, Clemson, and Northwestern. This would be one of the weirdest scenarios in my opinion. So We'd end it with Clemson, Alabama in the first round, which is fun. Always love Clemson, Alabama matchups. And then Northwestern, Notre Dame. As I said before, it'd be fun to watch Northwestern's defense go against Notre Dame's offense, and then Notre Dame's defense go against Northwestern's offense. It would be a lot of fun. That would probably be the least exciting of the two matchups, though, because Notre Dame's offense with Ian Book is not as exciting as their defense. I don't know. I think both Northwestern's defense and Notre Dame's defense are very solid. It'd be a very low-scoring game, in my opinion. Now, this is where we start going into our little wacky scenarios, right? So in this scenario, we end up with just straight normals throughout the playoffs. You end up with Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State winning their conference championship. So 1 would be Alabama, 2 would be Notre Dame, 3 would be Ohio State, right? So normal scenario, as I said before, Texas A&M would get in that 4 spot, right? But in this scenario, Texas A&M loses to either Tennessee or Ole Miss. I think they still play Ole Miss. I don't think that game was postponed. It depends. Depends on which side I'm looking at. Sometimes it says it's canceled. Sometimes it says it's postponed. So I don't know when if they are actually gonna play that game. But they do play Tennessee this weekend, so I'm hoping Tennessee beats them because this would be a fun scenario to look at. Then you'd end up with Cincinnati in that 4 spot, and it was see our first Group of 5 team in the college football playoffs, right? So it'd be a lot of fun, at least for me personally. You see Cincinnati get that spot, it would be so much fun, right? So then we'd go from Cincinnati's defense and that run game to Alabama and that ground game and the passing game. It'd be a lot of fun. I think that would be a really good matchup personally. I think Cincinnati's 4th best, maybe the 5th best team, but the fact is, if Clemson loses to Notre Dame, they're not making it. So I think Cincinnati's better than Texas A&M, but I think the College Football Playoff Committee's underranking them right now. So in this scenario, we'd end up with seeing Cincinnati in the playoffs with the first Group of 5 team. So this is probably the last realistic scenario. This is a little bit, you got to go out there, you got to think a little bit. So in this scenario, like I said before, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State win their championship games, right? Which eliminates Clemson and Northwestern from playoff contention, right? So in this scenario, Texas A&M loses to Ole Miss or Tennessee if they play one of them, and then also Cincinnati loses to Tulsa in the American Championship. So that would leave Indiana in a position to grab that 4 seed, bringing 2 Big Ten teams to the playoffs, which I don't think has ever happened before. Which I think the only conference that has got 2 teams in it was the SEC when they got Georgia and Alabama a few years ago. Alabama would then play Indiana in round 1. That'd be a lot of fun, in my opinion. Indiana's looking like a very solid team at the moment. Tim Allen has coached them well. Fortunately, they've canceled their game against Purdue this weekend. So the stuff after this is never going to happen because the fact is Indiana is not going to lose because they're not going to get another loss on their resume unless some crazy stuff happens. So I'll go over that next time. So Notre Dame would again play Ohio State in a fun matchup, but Alabama, Indiana is the one that changes here. So Indiana is not going to play Purdue, correct? So we end up with, we have to, one of 2 things happens. Either the Big Ten flips on a dime and gets a game against another team for Indiana to play so that they can add another quality win to their resume. Maybe they play Iowa or something so that they can get another quality win and hopefully build up a resume enough to let them in. Maybe the Big Ten wants to try for that. I don't know what the Big Ten plan is. Or decide that Indiana hasn't played enough games, which just doesn't make any sense because Ohio State's going to play the same amount of games if they win the conference championship. So I don't know. But let's say Indiana is scheduled to play Iowa or something, and Iowa beats Indiana, right? So in that scenario, and Cincinnati loses to Tulsa again, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State win their championship game, and Texas A&M loses to Tennessee or Ole Miss coming up, then this is what you're waiting for, Coastal Carolina fans. Coastal Carolina would make the playoffs in this scenario, but it would take a lot of work. Again, not a very likely scenario, but, I mean, Coastal Carolina has creeped its way into the top 10. It's looking like a very solid football team. Coastal Carolina actually was helped out a decent amount last week with Florida losing, and Miami losing, taking 2 teams really out of playoff contention. It would have been nice if Washington played this week and lost to Oregon. It would have taken Washington out of playoff contention, which they really have. I was thinking Colorado was eliminated from playoff contention heading into this week because they could not play in a championship game, right? Unfortunately, Washington was taken out of the conference championship due to some COVID issues, which means they're now eliminated for the playoffs. So we'll go over the next scenario. Again, Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State win their championship game. Texas A&M loses to Ole Miss or Tennessee. Cincinnati loses to Tulsa in the American Championship. Indiana loses to whoever they schedule Indiana's game against if they decide to reschedule it, which you have to hope they do if you're any of these teams' fans. And Coastal Carolina loses to ULL in the Sun Belt Championship. So, in that scenario, let's go back. Okay, so Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State win the championship games, right? In this scenario, USC wins the championship game. In this scenario, USC would slip in as that 4 seed, right? He would slip in, would steal that spot away. It would get the 4 seed, and we'd end up seeing USC Alabama, which is what we were planning on seeing at the beginning of the year if COVID stuff hadn't happened, and that would have been a very exciting matchup. Then you got Notre Dame, Ohio State, again, same as last time. It's a very exciting matchup, but the only thing that changes, we would be seeing Alabama, USC, correct? And then you get this last scenario. So again, like I said before, Washington eliminated themselves from playoff contention by doing what they did. So Colorado doesn't have to play a game this week, which means they can't add another win to their resume. But here's what could happen, right? Listen. If Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State win the championship games, and Oregon wins the championship game, that would leave USC with 1 loss, right? So then you'd have to have Texas A&M lose to Ole Miss or Tennessee. Cincinnati lose to Tulsa in the American Championship. Indiana lose to you have to hope that Indiana reschedules their game again. Indiana loses to whoever they rescheduled against. Coastal Carolina loses to ULL in the Sun Belt Conference Championship. So that would put in position for the Colorado Buffaloes to make the playoffs. So this is something I'd like to address. A 16-team playoff idea came across the slate a few weeks ago on Twitter. Now, everyone was excited about it and thought, man, that would be a fun thing to watch, right? So the likelihood of a 16-team playoff, them making a 16-team playoff, just real quick, is so unlikely, but there is a slight possibility of it, so I'd like to address the fact that it could possibly happen. So in the 16-team playoff bracket, according to the newly ranked college football playoff rankings, you end up seeing 1 Alabama versus number 16 Iowa. Now, ideally for me, this would be done like an NFL kind of like system, where you have, if you're a higher seed, you get to play at home. So like, for instance, if it'd be Alabama versus Tennessee, but it would be in Tuscaloosa, right? So I would have to travel down to Alabama in kind of like a playoff scenario. You travel down to Iowa. You travel down to Alabama. You'd have to play in Alabama, whether you get all the Tuscaloosa fans. It'd be a lot of fun. I think that's what we should be just striving for in the future. Make it a more NFL-like atmosphere, right? Let's March Madness. I love March Madness, but I don't love how it's taken to a neutral court every year. It would have been a lot. I think it's a lot more fun like the NFL does it, where when you make the playoffs, you have to travel to the higher ranked seeds, so that way you get home field advantage, right? So I think that's what they should do in the future. So just addressing it would be this week, you'd end up having the Iowa Hawkeyes, a very hot Big Ten team right now, traveling down to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to play the Alabama Crimson Tide, another team that's very hot right now. So the 2 versus 15 seed. So right now, Notre Dame is ranked as the number 2 seed in the college football playoff rankings, right? So we'd end up seeing the number 15 seed, the UNC Tar Heels, traveling up to Notre Dame. Now, we saw that a couple of weeks ago. It was a very close game until the 4th quarter, right, where Notre Dame ran away with it late in the 4th. I think UNC would like another shot at that game. UNC played fantastically well against Miami a few weeks back, so you'd end up seeing UNC traveling to Notre Dame in South Bend and trying to upset them there. I think that'd be a lot of fun, be a good matchup. So, right now, the number 3 seed is Clemson, right? So we'd end up seeing Northwestern traveling to Clemson to play them. Northwestern's playing a very high level of defense right now. Peyton Ramsey had that weird game against Michigan State where he committed a whole bunch of turnovers, right? But still were in the position to win that game. Do you know why? Because their defense is really good this year. Now, since Trevor Lawrence has been back, this Clemson offense has also been really good. So this would be a fun playoff scenario for me. I think Northwestern would also hold this to a very close game. So it'd be number 4 versus number 13, right? So in this scenario, the number 4 seed would be Ohio State, right? USC would travel to Ohio State to play, which would be a lot of fun. You get, I feel like this would be a lot more fun in a normal year where you have fans. Because imagine if you were USC and you have to travel to Ohio State in that kind of weather when you're used to playing in Southern California, you go up there to play them, and you end up with all the Buckeye fans in the horseshoe, and that would be so much fun to watch. I think that would be a really close game, though. USC is also playing very well. And you end up with a game where Ohio State has a lead in the fourth quarter, and you'd be like, well, USC comes back, because it's come back 3 out of the 5 games they've played this year in the fourth quarter. So it would be really interesting. So the next matchup we'd get would be number 5, Texas A&M. And you'd end up with, you'd have to go to Texas A&M Stadium, right? It would be actually Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina would be traveling to number 5, Texas A&M. I actually think that would be fun. That would be a fun matchup where you end up with Coastal Carolina Chanticleers, who've been playing at also very high level, very good football team this year, Chanticleers, and they'd be traveling to Texas A&M Stadium to play, and to Trask Stadium. And dang, that would be fun, though. It would be so much fun to watch that. The Chanticleers are a very good football team this year, and underrated. I think they're rated at 12. Really, they're undefeated. Just got a big win over BYU. Were able to survive Troy. I think that was impressive. So the next matchup we get would number 6 Iowa State and number 11 Indiana. So Indiana would be traveling to Iowa State. It wouldn't be that far of a drive, really. This is weird because I really think Indiana is a better football team than Iowa State this year, but I think it'd be a close game. I think Tim Allen on a backup quarterback would make this game a lot closer than it normally would be with Michael Penix Jr. But I still think Indiana would be able to come in there and upset Iowa State in this game. So then you'd end up with Florida and Oklahoma. So Oklahoma Sooners would travel to Florida in Gainesville to play Kyle Trask in that group, and that would be a lot of fun. Personally, I think that would be a phenomenal playoff scenario. A lot of fun for my Sooners, my Boomer Sooners, traveling to Florida, trying to get a big win over Kyle Trask. And then finally, you end up with Cincinnati, Georgia. That'd be a lot of fun, mainly because I just think Cincinnati's a very good football team this year, and Georgia's team significantly better with JT Daniels at the helm than when they played Florida a few weeks back with the mailman. Cincy is also very good on defense and in the ground game, and that quarterback's been improving by the week. Anyways, this is my different playoff scenarios heading into the final week of college football. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe if you want some more NFL, college football, college basketball, and draft analysis, as well as my Conference of Champions series that's coming up soon. And if you'd like me to do this video again next year, just comment down in the section below. I'm trying to branch into other things than just prediction videos. So anyways, this is GGB Close Buffer saying adios amigos.